Welcome to Dire Straits. I'm Amanda Monty.
I'm Tracy Clark Flory.
Today we're talking about a system of belief called techno-optimism. Even if you don't know this term, you're probably familiar with the ideas of this movement. It's a movement that sounds neutral, but we'll see how it's rooted not only in capitalist thinking about innovation, but also in misogyny, with a little eugenics and anti-climate philosophy sprinkled on top for flavor. So, Tracy, I really wanted us to discuss this idea of techno optimism. And I think at first you were kind of like, what does this have to do with heterosexuality?
Exactly. What does it have to do with heterosexuality?
Well, that is what we are here to find out. And I think it makes sense, to think how is this related to our key topic here. And I think it's probably a really common reaction to this term and to this ideology to see it as sort of a politically neutral philosophy, a common sense way of viewing the world and the development of new technologies. But as we'll see, techno optimism may pose as a political and corporate vision of the future built on innovation and progress. In fact, it's built on the same old tropes of male dominance, conquest, and control that we've seen for hundreds of years. It's this notion of futurism that's actually a return to the past. So I went into this really with an eye toward understanding what can this tell us about the state of heterosexuality and gender today. And I found a lot, including just how heterocentric and hypermasculine this techno-optimist movement is, and how central it is to the disintegration of America that we are sadly seeing right now.
Yes.
So I thought we should start with some basics. Tracy, do you know what techno-optimism is?
I really don't know what it is, but if I had to guess, like I have a vague sense of that it's this idea that technology will save us, that that it is the future, that it is salvation, that it will improve our lives, and that we must sort of just pursue technology wherever it takes us. Am I
Yes.
close?
Yes, A plus. Yeah, I mean, techno-optimism is generally defined as this belief that technology is good for humanity and that advancements in technology have the power to solve big human problems and create a better world. Sounds optimistic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just sort of off the cuff, what do you think of this idea?
I mean, I find myself very skeptical of it,
You're a techno-skeptic.
I'm a techno-skeptic for sure. I mean, I think part of what enters into the picture for me is like living in the Bay Area. Also, like Christopher, my husband, is in the tech world. And so like for the last, decade, I've absorbed some of that sphere and like the sort of thinking that happens in that world. And I've all along had this skepticism about the things that I see from the outside. No, I'm not these people are not going to save us. And it's not the technology, it's like the people who are creating the technology.
Yes, we will get to that. Yeah, we're both in the Bay Area. I feel like we're kind of surrounded by, the sort of Silicon Valley vibe, which we're also going to talk about today. But first, I really want to sort of peel back the surface layer here and dig into where does this word come from? And how is this often presented as both an intellectual philosophy and as a political movement? So to do that, I thought we could start by going to the source. Do you know who Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz are?
So I am vaguely familiar with Marc Andreessen as VC guy, extremely wealthy, and like supporter of Trump? Question mark? Right?
Yes, endorsed Trump and was very happy when Trump won. So yes.
See, we don't like him. Safe to say.
Already we're getting some red flags. Yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about why they matter for our thinking on heterosexuality in a moment. But first, I want to introduce you to this document that these guys have on their site that they co-authored. I'm sending you the link to the Techno-optimist manifesto. Can you read the quote that you see at the top of the page?
Okay. You live in a deranged age. Yes. I mean, this I agree with. more deranged than usual because despite great scientific and technological advances, man has not the faintest idea of who he is or what he is doing.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. So there's this sense of, despite these technological advances, man is sort of adrift, like morally, spiritually, philosophically.
Which is an interesting sort of epigraph to the Techno-optimist manifesto, right?
Yeah, indeed. Right. Like, I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, like this is actually, I'm like, I can get down with this. Like,
right.
like this could be leading to a good place, right?
Right. They got you.
Ah.
Yes. So just to be clear, we're looking at the Techno Optimist Manifesto posted October 2023. And we have this sort of epigraph to the manifesto, which is a quote by Walker Percy. So, for those who don't know, Percy was an American author who was famously anti abortion. So, we have our
Mm-hmm.
second red flag.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In 1981, he even penned an op ed for the New York Times that called abortion a banal atrocity. And very interestingly, in that op ed, he claimed that he agreed with the liberals on a number of progressive causes, but not abortion. That was too far for him. He also wrote a novel called The Thanatos Syndrome, which condemns abortion as well. But it is this sort of tale that's very reflective of this sort of man searching for meaning in a technologically advanced society.
Mm-hmm.
And as we'll see, for those in this movement, the way to overcome this isn't, as we might expect, less technology, but
Mm-hmm.
more of it.
Like,
So,
let's lean in further.
right. And as you know, many of these far right philosophies go, there's an incoherence to it, but it
Mm-hmm.
is really central to their thinking that we're living in a kind of like broken world that needs fixing. So we're not off to a great start, but let's keep reading. Tracy, you can probably see that the manifesto is organized by some tabs on the left. Can you
Mm-hmm.
read us a few of those section titles and let us know if any of the sections really catch your eyes?
I mean, yeah, it starts off strong with lies, truth, technology, and markets. There's the techno capital machine abundance. Um, Not utopia, but close enough. Like, that actually gave me chills. Like, like
Mm-hmm.
that, like thinking about these tech bros saying like, well, this isn't utopia, but it's close enough, let's just like let's seize on to this not quite utopia. It sounds so dystopian and
Yeah,
like hell on earth.
right.
um oh, becoming technological supermen
Mm-hmm.
um is really something. I want to know what that means, and now I'm like thinking of these men as children.
Well, you're not far off. Yes. So let's look at this section. Click on it and just
Mhm.
read some of that section for us.
Okay. We believe that advancing technology is one of the most virtuous things that we can do. We believe in deliberately and systematically transforming ourselves into the kind of people who can advance technology. It's like a little bit of like culty vibes. Some alarm bells are sounding for me.
Right.
We believe the natural human drive to make things, to gain territory. Okay.
It's
Well,
getting worse.
yeah. To explore the unknown. Okay, now I'm having like visions of like going to Mars and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that while the physical frontier, at least here on Earth,
There
yes,
you go.
yeah, is closed, the technological frontier is wide open. Oh man. Oh no. We believe in exploring and claiming the technological frontier. We believe in the romance, oh Jesus, of technology, of industry. Oh yes, the romance of industry. Oh God. Wait, Amanda.
The
I'm losing
arrows.
the eros. The eros of the train, the car, the electric light, the skyscraper.
Mm-hmm.
Phallic imagery much? Oh my god. Oh my god, the eros. Oh god, we should do a whole episode on the eros of techno
Of tech, right?
of tech in general. And the microchip. Yes, the erotic microchip. The neural network, the rocket, the split atom. Okay? We believe in adventure. undertaking the hero's journey, of course they do, rebelling
Mhm.
against the status quo, mapping uncharted territory, conquering dragons. They are 5 years old. Um,
Conquering dragons. It
yeah,
folks, it literally says conquering dragons.
conquering dragons and bringing home the spoils for our community. Okay.
I know it's pretty bad, but we have to keep reading a little further
Okay.
down.
Oh, technology must be a violent assault on the forces of the unknown to
Mhm.
force them, oh, to bow before man. Victim mentality is a curse in every domain of life, including in our relationship with technology, both unnecessary and self defeating. We are not victims, we are conquerors. Oh my God.
So, perhaps you see what I'm seeing, the sort of colonization of it
Yeah.
all?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have the technological frontier, which seems to sort of like do dual duty here, right? It's both, yeah, like an actual physical,
Mhm.
outer space frontier and the sort of like conquering of the unknown of what we can create with modern technology.
Mhm.
There's, talk in this section and in others of mastery and being the apex predator
Mm.
and overcoming nature, and
Yes.
which obviously has within it this notion of primitivism, right? And the racist history of division between, so-called savagery and civilization, right?
Well, and, like, women always stand in for nature, right? So it's like, it's
Right.
conquering nature/women.
It probably feels easy to sort of like laugh all this off as kind of like
Mhm.
fringe and not that serious. These guys, Mark and Ben, they also have a podcast. So Tracy, they're just like us.
Just like us.
And as you noted, on this podcast, they endorsed Trump in the recent
Okay.
election, with Mark apologizing to his mom, which
Oh,
we could do a whole episode on.
unpack that for a while, yeah.
And posing like their, endorsement of Trump was just another example of how free thinking they were. It's like, mom's going to be mad at me, but like, I have to do this because I'm
Mm.
so free thinking, going against controlling mommy.
Yep.
And they celebrated Trump's win as a relief from what they called the repression of little tech by Biden's administration. So they use this term little tech a lot. And I
Mm.
had to do some digging. It's like, what are they talking about? Because they don't seem little. Andreessen is a multi-billion dollar venture capitalist. Both of them
Mm.
are. So little tech for them, they're referring to like startups. They're very invested, as a lot of these tech bros are, in the image of the male genius in the garage who's
Yeah.
quietly inventing the future and, has to like fight against society to get his ideas made. That's how they make their money. They run a multi-billion dollar venture capital firm called A16Z. Have you heard of it?
I have, definitely. Vague
Okay.
awareness, yeah.
Okay. It's invested in familiar companies like Airbnb, Instacart, and Instagram, but also other lesser known companies that work in biotech and health data. And as I dug further into this whole landscape, I also learned that Biden's FTC had issued warnings to startups and, these tech companies over things like AI and algorithms and misinformation and all the
Mm.
stuff that you and I probably think is pretty bad about
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
So, these guys were looking for a change in the form of getting government regulation out of tech, so that startups aren't getting called out for being Ponzi schemes or doing other illegal things, and they can just charge forward into the future, right? Whatever that future may end up being.
So, yeah, like, is Trump their version of not utopia, but close enough? Like, is that
Exactly.
okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they see him as an opportunity to get what it is that they need so that they
Yeah.
can make the most money possible. So, these ideas that we just went through that feels so laughable to us are not that fringe.
Right. Unfortunately, no. Not at
Yes.
all. Yeah.
No, these guys actually have crazy political influence. They're a part of a group of what are sometimes called technocrats, right? They're often viewed as kind of progressive in their thinking. I think we often think of Silicon Valley that way.
Yeah.
That's changing now. But these are people who are controlling how we live, how we work, how we think, and not only through algorithms and tech that shapes how we communicate, but also in the control that they're exerting over politicians and government regulations. Um, JD Vance, this is so interesting. I didn't actually know all of this before digging into the research for this episode. Worked in VC before going into politics. Did you know this?
I had no idea.
Crazy,
No.
right? He's reportedly friends with Andreessen and received funding from him for Vance's own VC firm, which was called Narya Capital,
Oh.
which was named after Lord of the Rings. It's
Oh my
Narya is
god.
one of the rings in Lord
Oh
of the
my
Rings.
god. Oh my god.
Is that crazy?
Oh my god. How do I not know this? Like, that's
I
actually
know.
crazy that I know so much about Vance, but I don't know this piece of his history at
Yeah.
all.
Well, because he positions himself as this like good old
Exactly.
boy, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
as somewhat skeptical of technology. And I should say, too, without getting too far off track, these techno-optimist guys also have links to anti-DEI initiatives. There's links to Barry Weiss here that I wanted to go down
Oh,
such a
I
rabbit hole.
oh my god. Yes. Oh.
And we might say Barry Weiss is a techno-optimist, but it's this notion of free speech
Mhm.
as it moves on the internet,
Yes.
which, as it sounds nice, right? But
Yeah.
who's dictating how that works?
Right. I mean, the reason I was thinking about Barry Weiss is that, I like hear of things like rumblings in the tech industry through Christopher. Like he reads this very popular blog that people
Mm,
in the industry read. And there was a piece from the Free Press that went really viral on there that everyone was reading that was like a trans panic sort of piece about, trans youth and transitioning. I remember like the way that it seemed to be talked about, like it had that very like free thinking,
mhm,
heterodox attitude that
right.
I totally associate with people like Barry Weiss and their, all the others um, who are just the sort of like just asking questions kind of
Mhm,
attitude
mhm.
that seems to be very popular in some subsets of the tech crowd.
Right, right. Well, I think it's really related to, one of the main sort of rhetorical strategies of the techno optimist movement, which is this claim that, like, they're all about building a better future. Just asking questions is not that far off from like just thinking, just free thinking, just coming
Uh-huh.
up with new ideas.
Yeah. Right.
And that alone is the path to a better world, right?
Mm,
Um so, what that actually ends up looking like is a little bit more troubling, right? So when it's building the metaverse, right, as in the case of Zuckerberg and Andreessen, who's involved in the Web 3.0 thing, or colonizing Mars, as in the
mhm.
case of Elon Musk, right? Is this really about building a better world? And of
Right.
course, all these guys are also heavily invested in the development of AI, which we should have many episodes on,
Yeah.
and crypto. And Web
Mhm.
3.0, which frankly is totally confusing to me, um, do you know about Web 3.0?
I feel so annoyed by the concept. Like I've looked into it a couple times to be like, what is this thing? And then completely shut down. I can't. I cannot.
Yeah,
What
I
is it? What
mean,
is it? Can
it's
you
just like a little boy's like video game dream. It's a kind of VR theme park style internet that's built
Mhm.
using blockchain technology, and you need crypto to participate, and it's like the vision of the world where everyone's walking around with like VR headsets on their face. It's does not sound like a better world to me.
Yeah, very dystopian. Yeah.
Very, yes. And then you have guys like Peter Thiel, who's working on tech that would allow people to live to 160 or whatever. But of course, that's only going to be accessible to the uber rich. And honestly, I don't
Mhm.
know. Do you even want to live until you're 160? That sounds fucking crazy to me.
Definitely not if it involves wearing a VR headset all the time. Like, what the fuck?
Exactly.
Definitely not if we have to like
Oh my
leave
God.
this planet because we've destroyed it so thoroughly. Like, no, I'm
Right.
good.
Can you imagine? Yeah. So you're living in like a total economic and environmental collapse, but
Yeah.
you have like your phone strapped to your face. and you're living 100 extra years. That sounds so awful.
It sounds so terrible, right?
Yes.
Oh my god.
And clearly, you can see that these guys are not exactly about solving world
Yeah.
hunger or racism or any of the problems of heterosexuality or transphobia, as you pointed out, or women's unpaid labor in the home.
Right.
Those are not their projects.
Right, like, right, we're not gonna address, like, we're not gonna address domestic inequality. We're gonna try to get to Mars. Like, we're not
Right.
gonna address what we're doing to our planet. We're just gonna bounce. Like, and some of us are gonna bounce, let's be honest, right?
Let's be clear. Yes. So, yeah. And some have argued that techno optimists' primary projects like the metaverse, crypto, interplanetary colonization, which is just like
Ah,
such a crazy phrase,
God.
transhumanism. So, we're
Mm,
talking about this like totally cyborgian dream of adapting the body so that it can live on Mars. Not to mention
Jesus.
AI, right? These are an existential risk to the future. There's no awareness of future ethical concerns that these
Yeah,
tech, quote unquote, innovations might raise.
right.
And, how will the development of these technologies deepen divides and the oppression
Mhm.
of those who are already oppressed? These are not questions that these guys are asking. As an aside, when I was researching this show, I started watching this documentary on Twitter that's on, I think it's on
Mm,
Max. And the founders, who are all, like young white dudes, right?
yeah.
They even discussed, frankly, that they didn't even have time to
Mhm.
think about the ethical implications of the tech that they were
Yeah,
creating because they
totally.
were too busy
Well,
pushing the product forward.
totally. I mean, and the whole like metaphor that you hear about in the tech world, and I even like had a very brief stint in the tech world for a minute there. It's like the metaphor that everyone uses is that you are building the plane as you're flying it. And it's like that
Hmm.
scrappy startup mentality where you're just like, we're just making it work. Where you don't
Right.
have time to think about the future, like where is the plane going?
Yeah, and it hasn't really turned out great. I mean, look at, X, the dumpster fire,
Yeah.
like how it has changed American politics is
Yeah.
so unquantifiable.
Right.
But I want to turn our attention back to sort of the masculinity of it all,
Mhm.
because when we talk about the existential risk of these ideologies of technocrats, oligarchs, tech bros, whatever you want to call them, what's often really missing is a rigorous gendered analysis of how this notion of techno optimism is extremely straight white male
Yeah.
and how it's not new, right? it's
Mhm.
um it's precisely their selling point that they're leaders in human innovation, and actually these are very dated ideas. I mean, you can even see it in their evocation of the hero's journey, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
um
Right. Right. Like they're going backward into like, myth and,
right.
folklore and stuff.
Right. And as we know, like wherever hypermasculinity goes, we also tend to see abuse and control of women,
Mhm.
and white supremacy and transphobia. So we're going to get to that. But Tracy, I've pulled this piece from Andreessen's Substack for you to read. And I should say that I found this courtesy of Ezra Klein, who wrote a great op ed that we'll link to in the show notes on Andreessen's weird ideas. So, Tracy, can you take a look at this link? You can just breeze through some of like the main ideas. You'll see pretty quickly, I think,
Okay. All
what
right.
he's getting at.
At a private conference this week, I was asked what I think of Mark Zuckerberg's recent mixed martial arts training. Elon Musk's challenge to a cage fight. Yes, now I'm remembering that. Ugh. And public reports that a Zuckerberg Musk MMA fight may well happen later this year, perhaps in the actual Roman Coliseum. Oh my God. I said, I think that's all great. And in this post, I explain why.
Yep, the whole post. That's what the post is.
Oh my god. Okay. And why does he think it's all great, as he puts it?
Well, if we look a little bit further down, he's using this whole post to defend MMA, which isn't just
Okay.
a sport, according to him, it's the sport.
Okay.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And, but he really wants to be clear that his message to kids is not about beating people up. It is about evolving as quickly as the world is evolving.
What?
Uh
Okay.
huh.
What does that have to do with MMA? Is it because of like sort of like metaphors of like fighting and responding to your sparring partner, or like am I giving him too much credit even?
Honestly, the whole thing is just him like defending MMA. He says, one more thing, lest this be taken for some kind of gendered argument.
Uh-huh.
Let me say clearly that I think MMA is just as useful and relevant for young girls as it is for young boys. So for him, it's the rising American national sport. I mean, what do you think is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about how Zuckerberg talked on Joe Rogan's podcast months back about his love for MMA. He talked about his childhood surrounded by girls and women. He has 3 sisters, and now he's the father of 3 daughters, I believe, and he's, as he put it, surrounded by feminine energy and has been his whole life. He framed MMA and jujitsu as having saved him. He like waxed about the joys of getting together with his guy friends and beating each other a bit, as he put it. And this beating, this like quote unquote masculine energy, he says, like helped him to discover himself. And what's fascinating there is how feminine energy comes off as almost toxic. It's this suffocating influence that keeps boys and men from knowing themselves. And in the same conversation, he talked about the corporate world being neutered. I definitely felt this undercurrent of like, feminism has gone too far. It's fucked shit up for men. Like, let's fight back, literally. And it reminded me of a lot of the reporting that I've done in the past on the world of masculinity influencers, like all these dudes running masculinity workshops in the middle of the desert that like promise to connect men to their truest, most primal selves. And a key part of those retreats is wrestling in the dirt, often shirtless. So it's the same shit. And it's about reclaiming the masculine, but really it's about pushing back against feminism and more specifically against overbearing mommies. Like that's the kind of the history of men's work, is this idea of like the overbearing, suffocating mom, which makes Marc Andreessen's apology to his mom over voting for Trump especially interesting. But to bring it back to heterosexuality, Zuckerberg actually posted about having an MMA octagon, the like ring that they fight in, installed in his backyard. And he made a joke on social media about his wife being annoyed by it. And it felt like a very classic, like sexist sitcom joke, like the old ball and chain taking issue with his little bad boy antics. So there often tends to be some biological essentialism in the mix when it comes to these MMA obsessed tech dudes. And so I kind of wonder about that with Andreessen here.
Right. And I mean, I think what's interesting about this post in particular is that he really does kind of attempt to degender all of that.
Mhm.
And he claims that, what's so great about MMA is that, it's about self respect. And he has this like JFK quote that is, about like we've become like a nation of spectators and we're not athletes anymore and we're not like active. We're not like getting our skin in the game, which is both like sort
Mm,
of like weirdly fat phobic, and also, again, this sort of like degendered notion of getting out there and like doing the thing. But I think, yeah, you're right. Like we can see pretty transparently how much of this is rooted in that sort of old insecure masculinity that's
yeah,
always been woven into the ethos of Silicon Valley,
right.
And I mean, people, have argued that like Mark Zuckerberg, it seems like he's different now, but that he hasn't really changed, right? That he's just sort of
Hmm.
revealed that's always been there. Like Face Smash was like a tool to harass women and
Right. Like that's his
um
origin story. Right. Where he
not new.
started. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But he kind of like went through a phase where he sort of presented in this much more progressive way. I think helped in part by,
Hmm.
the sort of publicity tool of his wife, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now that has sort of crumbled.
But I would argue that the masculinity that we see in this movement goes back even further. And so to see what I mean, I'm going to ask you to read one more section of the Techno-optimist manifesto. I know it's so bad. I'm sorry to make us go back to it. But Tracy, I'm hoping you can click on the section of the manifesto that says the future, because we want to know what they think the future looks like, right?
Do tell.
But then I'm going to have you scroll down to the list of patron saints of techno-optimism. So these are their gods. These are the people that they look up to. Do any names stick out to you?
Let's see. Andy Warhol. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Bertrand Russell. I read some Bertrand Russell back in the day when I was like an arrogant atheist. Oh, Buckminster Fuller. I am like vaguely familiar with because I've been on a big reading about utopia kick.
Mm-hmm.
And like vaguely I understand him as, like being an architect or having a vision around architecture and utopia and like future societies and design, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And so maybe that relates to the not utopia but close enough piece of this. Who else do we have? Oh, Nietzsche. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Old
Wow.
Friedrich.
Old Friedrich. Actually, I way prefer referring to him in that way. That's good.
Yeah, Andy Warhol's interesting because I think he's often held in high esteem by these like capitalist tech bros who see themselves as visionaries, but specifically aesthetic visionaries. And I feel like there's so much we could say about the aesthetics of the right now. I mean, there's a lot of weird names on here, but I wanted to point out a name that I found really fascinating in this list of patron saints of techno-optimism, which is Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, who I actually do happen to know a lot about. Do you know who Marinetti is, Tracy?
No. And how do you know who this person is?
Okay, so Marinetti is a founder, or the founder of the Italian Futurist movement. They were an aesthetic movement who literally burst onto the scene, or at least they would love that description, in the early 20th century. In Europe, obviously, they were a group of artists who painted these images that were really dynamic and full of like images of speed and light. And they were very influenced by the development of electricity and machines. And their mythology is that they were sort of like men who stayed up late talking about the future because they had electricity now, they had light. And they were all about the rejection of the past, the celebration of modernity. They were very nationalist, and they had a manifesto, which is how I know about them because I used to teach artistic manifestos every semester when I was teaching college writing. So you can see why I'm fascinated by these manifestos. So Tracy, if you could read from Marinetti's manifesto, these are the beliefs of the Italian futurists that apparently our modern day innovative tech bros are very enamored by.
We want to glorify war? Okay, great. The only cure for the world? Militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of the anarchists, the beautiful ideas which kill. Oh, and contempt for woman. We want to oh my god, I'm like, we want to demolish museums and libraries. Ugh. Fight morality, feminism. Will sing of the great crowds agitated by work, pleasure, and revolt, the multiple colored and polyphonic surf of revolutions in modern capitals, the nocturnal vibration of the arsenals. It's like gotten so poetic. The gluttonous railway stations devouring smoking serpents, factories suspended from the clouds by the thread of their smoke. What? Bridges and the leap of gymnasts flung across the diabolic cutlery of sunny rivers. I'm so lost. Adventurous steamers sniffing the horizon. Great-breasted. Okay,
Great
locomotive.
breasted.
That wasn't necessary. Puffing on the rails like enormous steel horses with long tubes for bridle, and the gliding flight of aeroplanes whose propeller sounds like the flapping of a flag and the applause of enthusiastic crowds. Wow, they were just like really jerking off there.
Really jerking off to technology.
Christ. Oh my god, the
Following
long
up
tubes and the great-breasted locomotives. Wow.
Following up their contempt for women
Yeah.
and their desire to demolish feminism is this
Yeah.
masturbatory
Totally. Yeah, the
paragraph.
contempt for women and, feminism was just foreplay. Jesus.
I mean, they were very much a woman-hating movement, you know? So
Yeah.
to put this on your patron saints of your, blog says a lot.
This isn't like a whoops, like,
Nope.
whoopsies, I just didn't do my research enough. It's
No.
not an accident.
No. And we know it's not an accident because these people have connections to a lot of other stuff that supports this idea that they too are about defeating feminism and contempt for
Right.
women.
Right.
So we've sort of arrived at my most important point here of really what this does all have to do with heterosexuality, besides
Mhm.
the rampant toxic masculinity of it all, which of course very much structures how we think of straight culture and
Mhm.
people's place within that culture.
I would guess that we're going somewhere that has a whole lot to do with the control of women's sexuality and reproduction.
Yes.
Maybe in a li
Bing, bing,
with
bing.
a little pronatalism thrown in.
Yeah. I want to turn our attention to a couple some of our listeners may be familiar with, Malcolm and Simone Collins. This is the couple who founded the Pronatalism conference that was recently covered by that big Times report on how the current administration is taking advisement on how to coerce women into having children. Tracy, do you know about the Collins? The Collinses? The
Just
Collins?
very vaguely because of the recent press coverage, I, saw some photos of them online and actually could not click on it, I
Yeah.
have to say. I'm not proud of that, I think this is really important, but I, just couldn't at the moment. But I'm glad to have you as a sort of, translator to just digest that and explain.
I understand the desire to not click on them. People have probably seen images of them. They wear these thick rimmed black glasses. And Simone, who has 4 children, they both have 4 children, and has said she'll keep having more babies until she has medical complications that prevent her from reproducing or she dies in
Mm.
childbirth. Has said that their goal is 12 to 14 children, a baby a year. They are using reproductive technology to alternate the sex of their baby per
Ooh,
year.
interesting.
This couple has stirred the ire of many a feminist. Simone wears a bonnet sometimes,
Oh
and
god.
I don't even know what century dress that's a blouse all the way buttoned up
Uh-huh.
to her neck. So there's like a bit of this like LARPy Handmaid's Tale vibe
Uh-huh.
in their public personas, and honestly, I feel like they're just fucking with us. They're just
Well, I was gonna say,
punking us.
are they trolling us?
Yeah.
I think the outfits sound so over the top as to be a troll.
And I would say that that's where we are politically right now, that we could apply that same analysis to Trump, right?
Yeah,
That is he just
totally.
punking us? Of course
Uh,
he is.
yeah,
Right before us recording this, right? He posted an AI generated image of himself as the Pope,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
uh, and so I almost didn't want to cover these people or talk about them at all because they're so incredibly good at getting
Yeah,
journalists to write profiles on them. And I
yep.
feel like that's kind of their shtick, to pretend
Mhm,
that they're more important than they are and then to get people to write about them as such. They call themselves provocateurs.
mhm.
They're extremely reactionary, but they are self proclaimed pronatalists and techno-optimists. And, they are sending policy advisement to the White House, right? So, as ridiculously unserious as they may seem
Yeah,
to us, they are finding a way to have influence, right?
right.
Which, same with all these guys that we've been talking about. Right.
Oh, totally, right. Well, right, we're just living in that age of
Yep.
unserious people put into positions of great power, right, so we must take them seriously, unfortunately.
Right. And their argument is that we're on the verge of global systems collapse. So for techno-optimists, they're like pretty pessimistic.
Yeah.
But this is because, according to them, because of low birth rates, right? And so they preach, using like new tech and reproductive technology, and even Bitcoin are the answer to these problems that have sort of already been set in motion. It's like sort of too late for us to get out from underneath this systems collapse.
Mm,
They have also been called hipster eugenicists, and that's what I really want to talk about because I think that the key to really understanding the convergence of this notion of techno-optimism and pronatalism, and therefore understanding like how this all impacts the way we think about heterosexuality and reproduction today is the way that they're talking about birth and the role of women and women's bodies,
mm,
and the American family.
mm.
And so with the Collinses, they're really talking about optimizing birth and human life through reproductive technology. Another thing that is really important to note about these people is that they are red pillars, but of a very particular sort. Tracy, I know that you
Okay.
know a lot about this. Can you kind of remind us what that means, this notion of being
Yeah.
a red pillar? Or...
I generally think about the red pill in terms of its manifestation in the manosphere. And within the manosphere, the red pill, the famous subreddit that essentially proposed what is a feminist conspiracy theory, holding that, it's not women who are the oppressed class, it's men who are the oppressed class. And part of the cause, or even the primary cause of that oppression, they say, is feminism. And that like feminism is that it is a feminist conspiracy theory in that they believe that feminism helps women to advance like a sexual strategy in the world, that disadvantages men.
Right. And Malcolm Collins has done like all these podcasts, and they have a Substack. So they're just like us too,
Oh god.
on this notion of the urban monoculture pill, which, as far as I could tell, is his
Mm.
term. But it's this idea that like urban centers, like coastal elite cities, but also just like bigger, city centers, breed a kind of uniformity. But they're not talking about like uniformity like we might be when we're talking about
Mhm.
heterosexual culture. They're
Right.
actually arguing that like women in these areas get so focused on their careers because, feminism has taught them that that's where they can find value in their lives, and they become hypergamous. Do you know what hypergamy
Yeah.
is?
I do. Unfortunately, I've spent a lot of time, in the manosphere, like, reading men talking about which is, like,
Mhm.
such an awkward word to say, but
Right.
the basic idea being, well, so the classic saying is alpha fucks beta bucks.
Mm.
Um, and this this theory is based off of very problematic evolutionary psychology, um, and it argues that women marry beta men who act as
Mhm.
providers for them, while sleeping with and getting pregnant by like sexy alpha studs with good genes, and that women are like biologically programmed to seek out good genes, but also to secure a financial provider. And so it's presented as this like dual sexual strategy. Um, and actually, as a side note, like I know about this in part because when I was in my 20s, a Manispherian blogger wrote an essay about me after I got married because he'd read some of my earlier writing about being a young woman who is like, sexually exploring and experimenting. And now the fact that I was getting married, he said something about how he was like, congrats, Tracy, you've won the mating game.
Oh
Um,
god.
and and he like literally wrote like an all caps warning in this blog post, warning Christopher to run away from me as fast as he could before it was
Oh
too
my
late,
god.
because he argued that I wouldn't be able to give up the cock carousel, as he called it. That I would just like,
That you were riding?
yeah, yes, exactly. That I would be so hungry for that cock carousel since I had ridden it. That's the danger of riding the cock carousel, is that and then you want to keep riding it. And
Mm,
so he was like, she's gonna basically, sleep around with alphas and cheat on you, and you're gonna be like, end up divorced in 10 years and having to pay child support. And so like
my goodness.
yeah. So I unfortunately have been like the focus of like some of this thinking. And yeah, so it all fits in very much with like the manosphere and like pickup artistry and that whole world.
Who is working on the invention of the cock carousel? Because that's
An
interesting
act yeah.
innovation.
It's such a beautiful sort of metaphor that they came up with. Yeah, the cock
Yeah.
carousel. I like the idea of like an actual carousel.
Right. Just
Um,
that you could ride whenever you
yeah,
want. Sounds
yeah.
great. That would solve all the world's problems.
Maybe that's the key to like reversing this,
Yeah.
feminist conspiracy theories. They just need to like that could be like techno-optimism that I could get down with. It's like
Right.
just
Right.
invent that thing
Right.
in defense of men.
Or all kinds of things could be on the carousel that you could rub up against. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to just be cocks. Anyway, well, that's interesting because, the Collinses, I listened to this whole podcast episode that they did talking about marriage, and it was so opaque and incoherent that I don't
Mm.
have so much to report back.
Mhm.
But, essentially they were talking about how they like agree with red pillars to an extent and with what
Mhm.
red pillars teach, about why it's so hard for men to succeed in the sexual marketplace, which I'm sure is like
Mhm.
a way of speaking that you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
But that it can only get men so far because, the dating and marriage marketplaces are different. And they
Mhm.
were sort of setting themselves apart as though like realizing that is what makes them so smart.
Mm.
Because, what makes a woman someone you'd want to sleep with is not what makes a woman a good wife. She's good for sex, but she's not good for being a wifey. And what makes a good wife is someone you can like build an empire with. And this is where this pessimistic view of the future comes in, this idea of global systems collapse and everything. And it's where the sort of techno evangelism comes in because for them, and I think these sentiments come up a lot more broadly in conservative politics and in, so-called techno-optimism. For them, the future is bleak. And so the nuclear family becomes this sort of isolationist policy. So Malcolm talks a lot actually about this fear he has that if he doesn't innovate and build an empire, then someone else, specifically like China or the woke liberals, will. They'll come in and build the world that they want. And those people, according to him, probably will have beliefs he doesn't like. So it's better if he builds his own empire if he gets there first. So in this way, I think that pronatalism and techno-optimism really go hand in hand. Neither are actually concerned with building a better world, encouraging tech or family for all. They're both these ideologies that are interested in populating the world with white, anti-woke people and ideas. So for the Collinses, marriage is really like a corporate partnership, right?
Mm.
And Simone talks about how it makes them more efficient at their public success. Obviously, it's also a container for reproduction, and that kind of productivity.
And they're like really highlighting the like technological aspect of reproduction here.
Yeah, in a really eugenicist fashion.
Right.
And you can see this come up in a lot of the other technologies that, some of these guys that we discussed are, trying to bring to fruition these different
Uh-huh.
ways of optimizing the body. For them, marriage is a container for doing this work of kind of
Mhm.
saving the world
Mhm.
through innovation. They have like founded a religion, which is a whole other
Oh.
topic.
Okay.
But
Whoa.
it becomes this container for supporting men to do this important, work of conquering the
I see.
technological frontier, right?
Right.
And for women to toil away, doing their work in the reproductive sphere by having
Right.
10, 12 babies until they die.
Which, like, brings us back to the point earlier about how obviously this technology isn't meant to save all of us, like, that there is this inequity baked into these, ideas of techno-optimism, like, that we're not freeing women from inequity. Women are part of the plan. They're unpaid and exploited and extracted labor is like a key piece. Like, while they're doing all their fancy, like, tech stuff, right? While technology is helping them to reproduce in exactly the way that they want to and as efficiently as they can, women are still stuck and toiling. Technology is not addressing that at all.
Right. None of these ideologies are addressing the unpaid labor that makes all of this stuff function,
Mhm.
right? And this has really been the problem with sort of strains of what we might call like techno optimism that we've even seen on the left. I mean, I'm sure that you've heard like a progressive bro or two talk about like the inevitability of capitalist collapse or like
Mhm.
how automated work is going to save us.
Mhm. Mhm.
These are ideas that often kind of go hand in hand, and Marx himself predicted that capitalism would eventually collapse because of the contradictions sort of internal to it and workers revolting. And he also thought that the machine could potentially be a liberating force, although he was like also wary of it. But there's
Mhm.
many other leftist and socialist thinkers who we could call techno-optimists who have also argued that technology, has this power to save us. And I think just, in a sort of like anecdotal way, we hear this a lot. Like technology's not all good, it's not all bad,
Right.
and people like really struggle with this, with this like what is this thing, in terms of technological innovation and like its power.
Right. I mean, well, yeah, and it's like I guess I keep coming back to this sense of like, oh yeah, of course the idea of like, AI actually freeing us from capitalism, freeing us from work. But then the just total skepticism when you look at people like Elon Musk and like I don't believe for a second that the people who are pushing this technology forward are actually interested in that utopian future at all. Like
Exactly.
there's no way that this technology is going to be used for anything other than greater inequality.
Right, exactly. So, to close us out here, I'm going to pull out some of my Marxist feminist theory. I hope that you'll excuse me.
Oh no. I
but
mean, nothing to be excused here. Please do.
But, so we're back at the Italians. There are Italian autonomous Marxists like Antonio Negri and Paolo Virno, who have argued, that machines and even precarious, work and other changes in work that have been brought about by capitalist systems were not totally negative. Even American thinkers like Michael Hart, and that the switch to information technology and cultural work, cognitive work, info work, over industrial work, right, could mean this reduction of work and reduction of exploitation in the future.
Hmm.
But as you're kind of pointing out, it's this argument that capitalism is going to lead to this like higher rationality when it
Yeah.
comes to work and life, and that this implies that capitalist development is necessary to free us from capitalism, which
Hmm.
is kind of
Yeah.
crazy. But Silvia Federici's critique of this and these thinkers was that this does not account for the externalized costs of technology. So I wanted to read a little quote from Federici's essay on precarious labor.
Mm.
What Negri and Hart do not see is that the tremendous leap in technology required by the computerization of work and the integration of information into the work process has been paid at the cost of a tremendous increase of exploitation at the other end of the process.
Mm.
There is a continuum between the computer worker and the worker in the Congo who digs coltan with his hands, trying to seek out a living
Mm.
after being expropriated, pauperized by repeated rounds of structural adjustment and repeated theft of his community's land and natural resources.
Mm.
They are blind to not see the capitalist destruction of lives and the ecological environment. They don't see that the restructuring of production has aimed at restructuring and deepening the divisions within the working class rather than erasing them. The
Mm.
idea that the development of the microchip is creating new commons is misleading. Communalism can only be a product of struggle, not of capitalist production.
Mm.
And she also argues in this essay that these kinds of theories, even the lefty ones, ignore the feminist struggle to completely restructure work such that women are not providing unpaid labor to
Right.
run capitalism.
Right, right. And it's so interesting, like how that just kind of completely disappears from view as, these techno-optimist conversations are being had. That it's just like we're not even interested in looking at that, right? Like it's not even in view at all. It's like we're not thinking about women as workers in the home.
Right. Or all the ecological destruction that it takes to do this
Mm.
blockchain, and all these
Right,
technological advancements.
right.
So, as we've seen, techno-optimism is actually really this hyper-masculine, hetero, male-centered vision of the future that includes forcing women into producing more workers, right, through the confines of marriage and through
Hmm.
this sort of eugenicist-inspired reproductive technology. And so, yeah, all these theories might sound like they're pretty neutral calls for more innovation and progress. I hope that now, whenever we hear these ideas that tech is going to save us and give us a better society, we can really ask, well, what's society, right? What kind of society is this
Hmm.
that we're actually producing?
Right.
And I thought we could close, Tracy, with an idea that I stumbled on again while I was researching this, that comes from the great Shulamith Firestone, who argued that we should use our technological genius to build artificial wombs
Oh, yeah.
to
Oh my
free
god.
women from
Yeah.
reproductive labor.
So this is so funny because back in the day when I was a feminist blogger, like I don't know, like 2008 or something, there we had this regular troll who his name was Brightstar. I will never forget him. Um, and he would regularly post about how artificial wombs were on the way and that it would be like the downfall of men. And he was like gravely concerned about this like inevitable future where like men would end up being the oppressed class as a result. So
Mm.
maybe he's onto something.
I mean, it's so interesting, right? To think about like the dude in the garage, like making something as being
Hmm.
like the male version of giving birth. What if it was a woman in the garage? Like, what would
Uh-huh.
she be making?
What would she make? Right. Would she be building an artificial womb?
Or
Yeah.
maybe she would be like Elizabeth Holmes and just fall into the same old traps.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, I think we've kind of seen that play out quite a bit. We haven't seen that revolutionary feminist use of technology, not in the artificial wombs way.
I think that the takeaway is that unless you are innovating with a feminist, anti racist, eco conscious lens, we're
Yeah.
just going to end up with more of the same trash. If there's anyone out there that is building an artificial womb to free women of reproductive labor, please get in touch. We are looking for sponsors for the podcast.